Hello, everyone. This is another episode of Conversations with Rob. If you're listening to us on the radio, definitely check us out here on the YouTube and like and subscribe and share our videos. And thanks again for listening on our radio broadcast. I appreciate that very much. Let's talk about California. We got impeachment going on. We got a lot of craziness on in the Middle East. And I have a special guest who I'm very excited to talk about this. Stephen Zunes. He's a professor of politics and international studies at the University of San Francisco, and he's also the coordinator of the Middle East Studies program. So, Stephen, thanks so much for coming on the program. Greatly appreciate it.
Great to be with you.
All right, so let's talk about impeachment starting off. I believe impeachment was a bad idea because, first of all, it ramps up Trump's base. Second of all, the impeachment should have been on the emoluments cause and Trump's business deals, but instead it was more so on the Ukraine. What is your take on that?
Well, I think both what Trump did in Ukraine and violation of the emoluments clause, not to mention the cover-up and campaign financing around the hush money, not to mention, of course, his assault on women, all of these, I believe, on legal grounds would have constituted high crimes and misdemeanors. And my own bias, and it's easy to say this because I'm a politics professor and not a party activist or anything like that. My own sense is that whether or not to impeach a president should be based on legal grounds, not on political grounds. So even if it was not good politically for the Democrats, I still think on principle they should have gone ahead. But what concerns me, though, is that the magnitude of these crimes is pretty serious. And I'm speaking as someone who personally opposed arming Ukraine. So again, this is not a political thing for me. Mm-hmm. That we have the foreign policy of the United States, rightly or wrongly, policy objectives based not on rightly or wrongly. Congress has pass laws about, or what the president may think but is best for the country, but to actually advance his personal political career. I mean, that's very, very dangerous. And I guess what concerns me the most was the failure to be willing to subpoena evidence against him, or even to allow witnesses against him. I mean, it seemed to be like to hell with the facts. And this strikes me as really signs of a kind of an authoritarian mindset, because, I don't care if the president's Democratic or Republican or liberal or conservative or libertarian or leftist or whatever, that if they no one is above the law. And I think it's a very key constitutional principle that I think is frankly in jeopardy right now.
Stephen, why do you think the Democrats just focused on Ukraine and not the business deals? Do you believe it's because a lot of Democrats are just as corrupt as Trump?
Oh yeah. I mean, they're certainly. My friend, the late Senator George McGovern, pointed out that both parties are essentially eating out of the same trough. And but I think that they believe they might have had a stronger case in the Ukraine situation. That's debatable, but I think that was the reason. I mean, both parties take from corporate PACs and all that kind of thing, but rarely you have someone as flagrantly as Trump, pushing foreign visitors and foreign dignitaries and others to take advantage of his personal property and to profit directly from kind of thing. This is even more flagrant than the usual legal abuses of politicians for financial gain.
I agree 100%. We saw what he was trying to do at Doral, at his hotel down there. He wanted to have the G8 there. They X'd that out just now. Also, you got all the Saudis that are running around in his Washington hotel. It's insane about all these foreign leaders. They're going to Washington. They're staying in his hotels, and he's making tons of money off it. So I agree that I feel like that would have been a slam dunk case. I mean, there's so many instances.
Yeah, definitely. But I mean, the thing is, I remember Watergate, and you even in the early phases, you had a handful of conscientious Republicans that says, yes, this really does cross the line to impeachable offenses. And then when they released the tape to try to explicitly call doing a cover-up, the Republicans recognized that there would be at most 10 votes for acquittal in the U.S. Senate, and that's when Nixon resigned, because he knew the case was hopeless. Because back then, Republicans were willing to say, "Hey, we may agree with the president politically, but this is clearly illegal, and regardless of party, presidents should not engage in these illegal acts. And if they commit high crimes and misdemeanors, they should be impeached and convicted." And keep in mind that just a year, less than 2 years earlier, I mean, just a year and a half earlier, Nixon had won by one of the biggest landslides in history. So this is a president who's actually a lot more popular than Trump. And whatever you may feel about his policies, I was very anti-Nixon, but whatever you think of policy, he's a reasonably intelligent person who served for 8 years as vice president in the Senate and House. He knew what he was doing, and he was, and you know, again, it couldn't be more different than Trump. But even then, he was, you know, he was forced to resign because of an inevitable conviction. But we're in a very different Republican Party nowadays, and again, that's pretty scary.
Well, he was a crook, but at least he did start the EPA. He did make those relations with China. So he did a few good things, even though he was crook, whereas Trump hasn't done anything good. My thing is, Stephen, though, we know impeachment tomorrow. There's going to be an acquittal tomorrow. Whether they like it or not, the witnesses are not coming out tomorrow.
And in fact, the news just came about 20 minutes ago. They did indeed acquit.
Yeah, okay. So with that happening, the witness is not coming out. You can't really have a trial without witnesses. So that's that's what it is. But my thing is, if they did impeach Trump, and this is where I do worry about if that ever did happen, which it's not now, but if it did, you put Mike Pence in there, who, Trump is an incompetent con man. He's just there. He babbles. You put Mike Pence in there, Mike Pence is going to get things done. I mean, in his record in Indiana as a congressman and a governor was insane against not only gay people, but what he did as far as abortion rights in general. I mean,
and foreign policy is a more standard hawkish and interventionist kind of person. Big supporter of the Iraq War, and he's one of these kind of right-wing Christian Zionists who basically say Israel should control the whole area there because it's in the Bible. I mean, that kind of stuff. But I actually have argued that in certain ways, Pence would not be as bad. I mean, politically, issue by issue, he's even worse than Trump. I guarantee that. But he was not a very effective governor of Indiana. I mean, the reason he even accepted being Trump's running mate at the time when everybody assumed that Trump would lose was that it didn't look like he'd be reelected in Indiana. And Indiana is a very Republican state, and I think he doesn't really have that cult of personality that Trump does. In fact, I think because of his rather hard-line Christian supremacist views, he would alienate a lot of the more libertarian-oriented Americans who tend to still be supporting Trump. And furthermore, the attention of the media would not be on the latest outrageous tweets or the latest violations of decorum or this or that and the other. We'd actually be able to talk about the issues. And issue by issue, it sort of reveal just how far to the right of mainstream America the Republican agenda actually is. And I think, frankly, the more you can talk about the issues and less the tweets or the crazy stuff that Trump is doing, I think it actually moves the political conversation forward and actually it makes it better for Democrats and people of a more moderate liberal left political persuasion.
So let's talk about a man that was big and he's from your neck of the woods, that was big in the impeachment here. He's Adam Schiff. Why do you think, because that's where I found you, were talking about Adam Schiff is not a friend to progressives. Why do you believe that?
Well, first of all, I want to say I thought he was very effective, very powerful, very articulate in the presenting the impeachment case, both his role in the House, but also as one of the floor managers in the Senate. So I don't want to take away from that. And again, he did a very good job at that. But what I was responding to was a lot of these things in social media, various memes about, oh, this guy's amazing, he needs to be president, that kind of thing. Because he's actually from the more hardline hawkish wing of the Democratic Party. He was one of the right-wing minority of Democrats, for example, who sided with Bush and Cheney against the majority of his fellow Democrats in supporting the invasion of Iraq, which was a clear violation of international law, a clear violation of the UN Charter, which, according to Article 6 of the Constitution, as a signed and ratified treaty, should be treated as supreme law of the United States. In fact, Robert Byrd, the longtime senator from West Virginia, who was definitely, by almost any measure, one of the more conservative Democrats in the Senate, even he recognized that the Iraq War resolution was unconstitutional, and you know, not just because of Article 6, but also sort of, you know, giving the president, you know, kind of blank check to invade when, under what circumstances he wanted to, without a formal declaration of war. And so it raised concerns for me that both politically he wasn't all that great, as a lot of liberals are trying to make him out to be, but also there's the irony of someone who supports such an unconstitutional, flagrantly unconstitutional resolution as the authorization of the use of military force in Iraq would be the one who was defending the Constitution against the violations by President Trump.
Right. Well, me personally, I can't say that the man, you know, he did make a great case. He's a very intelligent man, but I do agree with you.
He's a former prosecutor, and you could tell.
Yeah, he definitely made the case. But my thing is not just with Adam Schiff, but now I know you're from you're teaching at University of San Francisco, so this question is right in your wheelhouse. Shoaib Buttar is running against Nancy Pelosi in California District 12. We see San Francisco is supposed to be one of the most liberal cities in the country, but it's led by a person that, you know, is the Speaker of the House. This is her second time as Speaker of the House. But she is basically a neocon. She said that she was going to put up Bush when she went up in 2006, when the House changed to Democratic hands. She didn't do anything against Bush, and we talked about the Iraq War just now. And now she's, now she rips up the papers in the State of the Union. And I mean, as much as I can't stand Trump, I mean, come on, let's be realistic. That was just like a lot of show. But what do you think about that race? Shoaib Buttar, and I'm going to be interviewing him in next week. And I know the primary's coming up in March. It's March 3rd, I believe, for Super Tuesday for that. My thing is the guy is an extremely intelligent man. He was a law professor. He's an activist. He's a progressive. What do you think about his chances against Nancy Pelosi in San Francisco?
Well, part of the problem was that there were several progressives running. Tom Gallagher, who actually, a former member of the State House of Massachusetts, actually, prior to him moving out to California, and had been a delegate at a number of Democratic conventions. He's a leader in the local Progressive Democrats of America. He was running as well. I was supporting his campaign, but realizing that this progressive vote would split, just a few days ago, he says he's dropping out and endorsing Pelosi's main challenger now. Will still be on the ballot, but not actively seeking votes. The hope is that California has this unusual system, and that the top two vote getters and the open primaries face off one another. And since San Francisco is such an overwhelming Democratic city, there's a chance that that we'll have two Democrats, Pelosi and her progressive challenger, being against each other, and that'd be very good. Pelosi. I mean, a lot of people complain about Pelosi, that she's not nearly as progressive as her city. Calling her neocon would be a bit strong, but yes, a lot of foreign policy stuff has really disappointed me. I mean, she voted against the initial Iraq War authorization, but then she supported continuing and funding it for years. She's been pretty hawkish when it comes to Israel-Palestine, backing Netanyahu and Likud against Israeli moderates and peace activists. And on a personal level, what's been frustrating for me is that neither she nor her staff will even return my calls, and I'm probably, arguably at least on an academic level, the chief expert in her district on a number of key international issues, and it's not just because she's Speaker of the House. I live in Eastern Washington when Tom Foley was
Yeah.
Speaker of the House, and he and his people met with me. I live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, when Tip O'Neill was Speaker of the House, and his top people were willing to meet with me. But Pelosi, they have no interest whatsoever, and I've heard that frustration from some of my colleagues and others, that she's kind of set in her ways, and to hell with what her constituents, even those that have certain policy expertise, have to influence her. And in certain ways, I mean, she reminds me of a lot of the old guard Democratic machine politics that dominate a lot of American cities. That does the right thing and definitely looks left or center on certain important issues, but but willing to, but not really interested in what what people actually in her district feel, and has this kind of very establishment agenda, which is actually not no surprise when you think of who her father was, who was a longtime mayor of Baltimore.
Yeah.
And so she grew up in this kind of the old Democratic machine politics scene. And so on the one hand, it makes her very effective. I mean, she's very good at what she does. If you define good as being, putting her agenda and the agenda of the kind of people who support her.
Yeah.
But again, on a issue by issue, policy by policy, it's just incredibly disappointing that one of the most progressive districts in the country has someone, with a decidedly centrist or even center right politics.
Right. Agreed. How do you think we can? First of all, I wanted to ask you: do you think that she can lose that race in general? And secondly, how can more progressives get elected when the establishment rigs it, or they don't have that kind of money? We see. I mean, we look at the national race. Blumenberg is going to spend. He's already spent over $200 million for ads on the campaign. I mean, it's tough to keep up with. So how can we get more progressives elected?
Well, I think that I'm pretty confident that Pelosi will comfortably be reelected, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But there's a pretty good chance this will be her last term. And then it's going to be really, really interesting to see what happens. There's going to be quite a few people vying for her seat. And it's anybody's guess. Again, it's the first past the post, her first two past the post, and then so the concern. I mean, I think if the progressives could unite around a single candidate, we could get a genuinely progressive member of Congress from representing San Francisco. But my concern is that the establishment's going to be more united than the progressives, and it'll end up being very different. But what does give me some hope is that. I think what the Bernie Sanders campaign has shown is that, getting a lot of small contributions, you can actually raise more money than the people who go in the corporate PACs. You can get folks who folks who are enthusiastic, because the enthusiasm gap is a really big one. I mean, the conventional wisdom is that, the Democrats have to nominate somebody who is a centrist to win over those handful of undecided voters. And as a political scientist, I can tell you that by I'm one of those guys. I'm kind of nerdy about this. I examine the numbers, this kind of thing. That far more important than winning over the relative handful of centrist to center right voters is turnout. Getting high turnout, especially with underrepresented groups such as young people and minorities. And if you do that, that's how you win. And indeed, what one of the important statistic I've seen, I'm surprised more people haven't looked at this. If you look at the district, or look at the counties and other subdivisions in the northern tier swing states, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, if you look at the areas that went from Obama in 2008 to 2012 to Trump in 2016, you'll find that they parallel almost exactly the areas with the highest casualty rates from Iraq and Afghanistan. And if you remember from the 2016 campaign, Trump ran to Hillary Clinton's left on foreign policy, saying, I will not send your kids overseas to fight these endless wars. I'll bring the troops home. I'll put America first. And I opposed the Iraq war. She supported it. That wasn't true. He actually did support it. But just like his other populist themes about I'll stand up for the working man against Wall Street, of course, it's not true. But it worked. It worked. And that combined with her Hillary support for NAFTA and WTO and all these and these so-called free trade deals that also ended up hurting these communities, you had this white working class support, shift from Obama to Trump. And that's why it's really, really important, I think, if the Democrats want to win, is to nominate somebody like Sanders or Warren, and who has a very clear anti-war record and opposes free trade from the pro-worker, pro-consumer, pro-environmental end, as opposed to the kind of rigid, nationalistic parochial arguments that Trump gives, and really. And get the turnout, get the enthusiastic turnout.
Well, to agree with you there, I'll tell you what, Hillary Clinton, as you said, 5% less African Americans, 5% less young people against Trump. And also the establishment was pounding away on Joe Biden, saying he's so great. He's the only guy that can beat Trump. 4th place in Iowa as of right now. So give me a break. It's just a lot of silliness. I do want to get into California, since we're on that topic of San Francisco. We talked about Pelosi. We've seen places like San Francisco and California in general, it's unaffordable to a lot of middle-class Americans. I mean, the poverty rate is sky high. This is a bastion, supposed to be, of progressivism, and it seems like it's run by a lot of neoliberal policies. I mean, you look at, and you can tell us firsthand about San Francisco, how a person can't live in San Francisco as a middle-class person. We hear about stories in Los Angeles where people that teach in the LA public schools, they have to live like 30, 40 miles away from the school. I mean, this is insanity. Is this just because of the gentrification of America in general, that people can't live in San Francisco, California, or other big cities around the country, and they're just pushing people out?
Well, that's a huge factor. I mean, the cost of rentals, the cost of property in general is just it's just ridiculous. It's funny because I grew up in a university town in North Carolina, in Chapel Hill, and some of my best friends' parents are faculty, and they had these really nice houses and nice neighborhoods. And there was part of me thinking, oh, gee, when I grow up, I can be a professor. I'll have a nice big house like that. My wife, I live in a 1,100-foot duplex, even though I'm a full professor, and I'm lucky because I actually own a home outright. At this point, because we lived there for 25 years, but so many people, it's such a struggle, especially young people. I mean, we have students that are homeless. They're literally homeless. They alternate between riding to couch surfing occasionally, to riding BART all night, to figure out which lounges on campus they can kind of get away with sleeping in, and then they shower in the gym where they keep their clothes. I mean, it's really a crime. And the thing is that there's I've been to cities in Asia and Europe which are also very, very expensive, but the government says housing is a right, that we will make sure that even though the costs of housing and rentals are very, very high, as the market indicates, we as a government have an obligation to our people so that they can have a place to live and they don't live on the street. And that's that's the I have some friends who emigrated to New Zealand about 15, 20 years ago. And they say the thing that strikes them every time they come back to California to visit, which is every 3 or 4 years or so, is every time you see more and more homeless people on the street. And New Zealand, you don't see homeless people on the street. I actually had spent a sabbatical year teaching there. You do not see homeless people. And even though Auckland, Wellington, some of the other cities, yeah, they're pretty pricey. But again, I think it's just a matter of priorities. We can't. It's like healthcare, and education. You can't just leave it to the market. That the government does have a certain obligation to make sure that basic human needs like housing are available, are met.
We're definitely on the same wavelength as far as those things go, for sure. I want to dive into a little bit of the 2020 election. We saw Monday the chaos of the Iowa caucuses. And it's still going on. They're only 75% in. Last time I checked, which was an hour ago, which is insanity. It looks like almost like Florida 2000 as far as some of the aspects of that. What is your take on the result? We see Bernie Sanders has more votes, but he has the same amount of delegates as Pete Buttigieg right now. I think they both have 11 apiece last time I checked. And what's your opinion on the Iowa caucuses? I feel like, and I don't know if you've heard this, but we saw now that the app was made by, first of all, the app was called Shadow. You think of a little sketchiness on the name there, Shadow, by the DNC and all the trouble they've had in 2016 with the rigging. But then those people, the people that made that app was from the Hillary Clinton campaign. All right. Those were the people that developed that app. We see also candidates. Pete Buttigieg donated $42,000 to that app. Also, one of the workers that works for that app that developed it is a woman, and she is married to a senior advisor on the Pete Buttigieg campaign. Joe Biden gave $1,200 to this app. So did Kristen Gillibrand. Now she's out of the race, but I mean, what is? Does the Democratic Party get it? I mean, they think that we're stupid?
I don't think there's an actual conspiracy, but for the very reasons you outlined, it really doesn't look very good. I mean, I think the main thing was that you had this untested app, and remember, the precinct captains that organize these kind of things, these are mostly volunteers who are in their 70s. And, I mean, I have trouble with new apps. Can you imagine septuagenarian types, trying to figure this stuff out for the first time, and they hardly had anybody. And so if you have any problems, just call in. Everybody called in. They had like 2 or 3 people there, and I mean, so I really think it was incompetence. And this is really bad because, one of the big arguments the Democrats have is that whatever you think of his policies, that the Trump people are really, truly incompetent, which is true. But here in this first big test of the 2020 campaign, the Democrats screwed up royally. I mean, so Trump is really the big victor, unfortunately, in Iowa. And then because, the whole Democrat thinks, oh, we're the futurist party. We're so tech savvy. Aren't we cool? And like, oh, man, it was pretty upsetting. In terms of the outcome itself, I think, I'm assuming, and perhaps naively, but I'm assuming that it's actually fair and accurate. But some of the exit polls were showing that people had gotten the messages that we want. It's more important to get somebody who can beat Trump than can than the one I necessarily believe in. And so what the Buttigieg and the mainstream media were doing successfully is we can't have Warren or Sanders. We got to have Biden or Buttigieg. And because issue by issue, most Democratic voters are closer to Warren and Sanders. But many people are convinced of this myth that, oh, you have to have a centrist. But for reasons we were just discussing a few minutes ago, that in fact it's not the case. And what I'm really tired of is these Republican, these Republican intellectuals who are columnists for the Washington Post and New York Times. You know what I'm talking about. They have 6 or 8 of them who are horrified with Trump. Like, oh my God, what's happened to our party? This guy's crazy. And they keep writing articles saying why the Democrats have to elect a centrist. And Democrats start picking up these articles and circulating on social media and say, hey, wait a minute, guys, these are being written by Republicans. Do you really think they have the Democrats' best interests in heart? I mean, come on, get real. And so it's really a shame, I think, because I would, again, if the Democratic voters really believe that the values that they believe in and the competency to be president really thought Buttigieg or even Biden was better than Warren or Sanders, I'd be disappointed, but that I would respect that choice. What would drive me nuts is that they go and get somebody like Buttigieg or, God forbid, Biden the nomination, not because they agree with them, but because they've been convinced by the mainstream media and these Republican columnists and others that that's the only way to beat Trump, when in fact it could be just the opposite.
Well, all I have to say to that is Biden finished in 4th place,
Okay.
and Buttigieg has a 3% approval rating with black voters in South Carolina. So good luck winning a national election against Trump with the 3% with black voters. Give me a break. I mean, it's a total joke. And now they're trying to get Mike Bloomberg, as we talked about, with the $200 million he's already spent. He says he's going to up it more because he's going up in the polls because he's put so much in advertisement. And Trump will crush him. I agree with you. I think that Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, but I mainly think Bernie Sanders is the guy that has the movement. He's got the young people such as myself, and he's got young people all over the country, black and white people. I mean, you look at it, that was, he did really well. He won the popular vote, and who knows what's going to happen with the delegates. It's tied right now. But Sanders is up 32. We saw in the last poll 32-13. That just came out yesterday in New Hampshire. He's moving in on Biden in South Carolina. Biden was up by 30 points. Bernie's only down by 7 in the last poll. I mean, it just bothers me that the Democratic establishment, I think they want to lose to Trump. We ran Hillary Clinton. She was a centrist. What happened to President John Kerry? President Al Gore? Now, Al Gore won, but besides the point, he should have won by a bigger margin. He would have been president for sure. President Hillary Clinton when she ran against Barack Obama. So, I mean, what is it that they don't get?
Yeah, and again, going back to the thing about the Iraq War, the 2 times the Democrats nominated someone who's anti-war, they won handily. The 2 times that they nominated someone who supported the war, they narrowly lost a close election they otherwise would have won.
Agreed.
I mean, yeah.
No, I agree. Last question on the election, then I want to get a little bit into foreign policy. We talked about Sanders right now. Warren finished in 3rd place in the Iowa caucus. I know it's still going on, but she looks like she's going to finish in 3rd. And we talked about Bernie's poll numbers. As a Sanders supporter, I believe he's the best person to beat Trump because you talked about earlier in the interview, he voted against NAFTA. He voted against the Iraq War. He's been standing up for the same rights, Medicare for all, free college, the same things for 30 to 40 years. He's been saying the same things about gay rights too. Do you believe that Sanders is the one? He won't beat Trump, but he can win in places such as West Virginia. He won the Wisconsin primary. He won the Michigan primary last time in 2016. He can go into states that he won in 2016 in the primary, and he might not win them, but he will challenge Trump. Trump will have to put money into these states. Yep. Kansas, Oklahoma, he won in 2016. Not a guarantee, as I said, that he would win in 2020, but you make Trump put those resources in there. What do you think about a Sanders nomination? And do you think that they'll rig it against him?
Yeah, I think Sanders would be one of the strongest possible Democratic nominees. I think he would have certainly beat Trump 4 years ago because it would have taken the thunder out of his anti-establishment message, his anti-NAFTA, WTO free trade message, his phony anti-war
Stephen, not
message.
to interrupt, but I got to say this. We just saw about a week or 2 back, it was all over the news. They had a tape of Trump saying that he was praying that Hillary Clinton didn't pick Bernie Sanders for the VP because he knew he would lose if that was the case. So that goes right to your point.
Right, exactly. I think I should mention for the record that even though I am closer to Bernie issue by issues, I've endorsed Elizabeth Warren because I think that though they're not quite as progressive as Sanders, I think she has the wherewithal to actually be president and get things done. And I also think that the attacks, she'd be less vulnerable to the likely lines of attacks from Trump than Bernie would be from likely lines of attacks from Trump. But please know that I would still be thrilled if Bernie Sanders gets the nomination. I think he would be almost as strong as Warren. In fact, the current polls show him running even stronger than Warren or any other Democrat for that matter. So I do think that, and I also just should mention that I have known Bernie, not well, but met him a number of times going way back to when he was first mayor of Burlington, Vermont. So I feel very positive thing. I was a very strong supporter of his 4 years ago. And I think we really, and I think you really were on the mark there when you said that he has a movement behind him, because that's really, really important. Because and that also, so it illustrates this is not just presidential preference. This is people who are true believers who will go for the bat. And here's the big thing: is that when he wins, when he becomes president, they will continue to fight for the issues. I think one of the big mistakes Obama did was that he had potential for a movement, but then he basically disarmed them. Go home, let's work for the Democratic Party, let's da. And Obama, especially since he was so articulate, he could have done a bully pulpit thing. And that's what made Reagan so dangerously effective. He had this kind of plebiscitary presidency, where he could go on TV and rally his folks to support these awful pieces of legislation. By God, he was a really good actor. He could convince people just about anything. And I think I really wish Obama had done that, because I think he would have gotten a lot more progressive things done. That's even things that he may have actually believed in himself, but was too quick to compromise on. But Bernie, Bernie knows, and actually Warren has made some references to this as well. Even though she doesn't have as much of the movement per se, she recognizes the power presidency has a lot to do with not just the office, but how they can mobilize the American people to support their agenda. It goes back to, when you think of the president, the modern president has done the most radical and progressive changes in U.S. history. It was Franklin Roosevelt. He had those weekly fireside chats,
Right.
and he got people. And remember in this famous meeting with A. Philip Randolph, when he was the African American civil rights leader and union organizer, head of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. This is back when trains were the main means of transportation, trying to get him to allow them to organize. And since it's interstate commerce, it was a federal issue. And he talked to him about why they needed to be a federal legislation to help them. And FDR listened to him carefully, and he said, "Okay, you convinced me. Now I'll build a constituency who'll make me do it."
Right. That's
6 months later, he signed the National Railway Workers Labor Rights Act into law. And I think that is where I think Bernie would be so effective. He would mobilize a constituency that when he got pushback, not just from Republicans, but from mainstream Democrats, for his agenda, there would be a mass of people behind them calling Congress, protesting, getting out there and saying, let's move this agenda forward.
We're both on the same team, Stephen, for sure, and I would support Elizabeth Warren if she were the nominee. Can I push back a little bit on your endorsement of Warren, though, if I can? I'm from Rhode Island originally. I still go up there. I still have family in Massachusetts, go to Massachusetts quite often. I was a big fan of Elizabeth Warren back in 2012 when she ran against Scott Brown. My problem with Warren is, and like I said, I would vote for her if she was the nominee. But my problem with Warren is what she's done, and this is, I feel like Trump could use this again. The Native American thing with that, Trump will use that, and he already has day in, day out. Also, they have, I don't know if it's true, but they have come out and said about when she said about she had gotten fired about her pregnancy. That's come out as, it might not be true.
Actually, let me interrupt there. PolitiFact looked into it, and basically, she was forced to resign. That's how they did it back then.
Right.
You were forced to resign. It was a route, or essentially not have her contract renewed, and that was standard. Because I remember being in elementary school in the '60s and have a beloved teacher who, when she became pregnant, was forced to resign. And this is a very routine, so that was accurate. So if you want to be technical, she was not fired, but if she hadn't resigned, she would have been fired, and her contract not being renewed. Again, that's essentially being fired. Right. I think what we're seeing is frankly, a lot of nitpicking that I really don't think is going to hold too much water in the long term, especially compared to the very real lies and illegal things that Trump has done.
No, I agree. But the thing that bothers me the most about Warren is what she said about Bernie, basically calling him out as a sexist on live TV, calling him a liar. No, that she said that he was a liar. They go back and forth about that. That's Bernie is you. And
I think that was a genuine misunderstanding. My guess is what happened was that they had this exchange, and that Bernie may have indeed expressed concerns about, given what happened to Clinton, the sexism there. not say, and you know, she interpreted it as saying a woman couldn't run. She grumbled. She mentioned it to an aide sometime later. The aide was having a beer with a reporter sometime later, mentioned it, and then CNN tried to make it an issue to sow divisions between the two progressive candidates. She was caught off guard on stage. She stuck up with what she remembered at the time. Bernie outright denied it, as if she was making it up. It was contrary to her memory, so she challenged it on that. I don't think either of them are deliberately lying. I think both of them remembered things the best they could. And this is something that was manipulated by the media. She never called him a sexist, and so I think it's really been blown out of proportion. And actually, both Bernie and her, you know, since that awkward moment in the debate, have been bending over backwards to try to try to mend fences. They were seen just a couple days later, arm in arm, marching in Atlanta,
in
Georgia.
Carolina,
though unfortunately, some of their partisans have been trying to blow it out of proportion. The whole thing didn't do anybody any good. But again, I don't want to assume that either was at fault, and certainly do want to assume that either of them was lying about it.
Okay, fair enough. Let's move on to some foreign policy stuff before we end the interview. I want to talk about the Middle East. We saw the Trump killing of Soleimani. From what, and you're an expert on the Middle East, so you'll know better than me. But from what I hear from the shows, is that Soleimani, he did kill Americans in Iraq and during the Iraq War, but Soleimani was a guy that was defeating ISIS. He was helping us defeat ISIS. Trump goes in there and kills somebody that's helping us. I mean, this is just insanity.
Yeah, just a few, just a year or so ago, the United States was providing direct air support for Soleimani's forces because they were so effective against ISIS, whereas the corrupt Iraqi army that we helped create wasn't nearly as effective. Now, I should mention that Soleimani's forces were ruthless. They did kill a lot of ISIS people. Unfortunately, they killed a lot of Sunni civilians, and the guy really is bad news. The militias he supported in Iraq and Syria are really nasty, killed a lot of innocent people, et cetera, et cetera. Though, interestingly enough, I actually question this charge that he killed hundreds of Americans. For one thing, with the exception of that one contractor that may not have been killed by an Iranian-backed militia, no Americans have been killed by Iranian-aligned forces for at least 8 years. But the more importantly, these charges that he had killed hundreds of Americans are apparently from charges made by the Bush administration back in 2007. Now, I did a detailed report for the Institute for Policy Studies on this, and followed these accusations. The Bush administration never produced any real evidence to support this. Indeed, virtually all the rebels that were killing Americans were either Sunni tribesmen, Baathists, Salafists, and others who are fanatically anti-Iranian, anti-Shia, and even the Shia militias, Muqtada al-Sadr's forces, the Mahdi army. These were not pro-Iranian Shias. These were more nationalistic or independent Shias. The evidence, in fact, the national security statement and investigation report by U.S. intelligence agencies that Iran was not much of a factor at all in the anti-American insurgency. And this came out just 2 weeks before the Bush administration started pushing this line. And the only real argument, they said, was these roadside bombs that had been killing Americans had increased in sophistication, and that they were too sophisticated for the Iraqis to make, so therefore it must be from Iran. But remember, this is the same administration just a few years earlier saying Iraq was so technologically sophisticated they could build an atomic bomb if we didn't stop them. And now they're saying they're sophisticated enough to make these long-range missiles, atomic bombs, and all these other weapons, but they're not sophisticated enough to make a roadside bomb. I mean, come on, And so I really even questioning this notion that they are responsible for the deaths of hundreds of Americans. Not to mention this nonsense. Oh, he was about to blow up 4 American embassies. I mean, come on. Yeah. Again, some of my people have been pretty ruthless. That's not their modus vivendi. They are not the blowing up embassies kind of people. You'll have other nasty stuff. That's not how they roll. And so it was fantasy from the word go.
Tulsi Gabbard has brought this up, so has Bernie. I'm not sure if Elizabeth Warren has, but about the endless wars. We have endless wars, and it's every president, Obama included, Afghanistan, Iraq. We went into Libya, and now he's trying to play around. Trump is with Iran. How do we fix some of these issues? I mean, look, Libya. Hillary Clinton thought that was such a great idea. It's like a slave state now. It's Iraq is a mess still. Iran got a lot of power because they had that. That was that buffer zone. They hated each other.
There would have been no pro-Iranian militia in Iraq and no U.S. bases vulnerable to them. Neither would exist if we hadn't invaded Iraq, because obviously Saddam didn't like Iran or the United States.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but in terms of your question, I mean, well, first of all, Warren has addressed this too. In fact, just a week and a half ago, she had this excellent article in the Atlantic magazine, which literally said, "Let's stop these endless wars," and that was the headline. So she's addressing these issues too, and I think it's a reflection that what she and Sanders have been saying, because they recognize that the American public are really, really tired of this kind of thing. And that public opinion is very strongly anti-interventionist, especially among younger people who tend to be the ones who are sent over to die in these endless wars. What's also kind of interesting, and this is also why it's really, really important that the Democrats nominate someone with a strong anti-war tradition, is that we're having this growing movement among conservatives, a more libertarian isolationist streak that is really important to win over. And I mentioned why all those districts that went from Obama to Trump, because Trump ran to Hillary's left. And I remember when he announced, when he pulled those U.S. troops back to the Turkish border, and the Turks came in, started slaughtering people. He's saying, "I'm bringing the troops home." He wasn't really. He actually increased the troops in the Middle East to protect Saudi Arabia from Iran, even though Saudi Arabia has 6 times larger military than Iran does, and he kept troops in Syria to guard the oil fields and to hell the Kurds being slaughtered. But anyway, he pretended he was bringing the troops home. 2 days after he made that announcement, he was giving a rally in Texas saying, "I'm bringing the troops home," and people started chanting, "Bring the troops home! Bring the troops home!" Like, think about that. A Republican rally in Texas, and people are chanting, "Bring the troops home." And I think it's indicative of a sea change in American attitude against intervention.
Stephen, let me ask you this.
Any brains at all, they're going to have to push a strong anti-interventionist, anti-war agenda.
Stephen, let me ask you this. Like I said, the big campaign that was for all that "Bring the Troops Home" was Tulsi Gabbard. She never really caught fire on that. I would hope that in a Sanders administration or a Warren administration, she could be a great defense secretary.
My problem with Gabbard is that even though she had a couple of the best lines in the debates about foreign policy, really I really like. I'm afraid she's a little bit of a mixed bag, and that I think for one thing she has she's one of these anti-war people that I think has gone a little too far in actually rationalizing for and downplaying Assad's war crimes. I think she's also exaggerated the U.S. role there in the anti-Assad movement. I oppose U.S. intervention in Syria. Don't get me wrong there. I oppose the bombings we have done, and we were trying to arm the so-called Free Syrian Army. I'm very much against that. But in recent years, U.S. aid has been exclusively to the Kurdish groups and that are basically going after ISIS and trying to protect this autonomous area in the Northeast. They haven't been. In fact, the conditions of aid actually is not to try to overthrow Assad, because you knew if Assad was overthrown, these hardline Islamists would probably end up taking up the vacuum. So I think, I'm comfortable about her claiming that it was all about regime change in the U.S. was somehow responsible for the Syrian revolution, which, even though it did get taken over by the Islamists, was at least initially a popular, broad-based, pro-democracy, progressive struggle. The other thing that I kind of take issue is that her ties to some of the right-wing Hindu nationalists, Modi, some of those folks, as well as some connections to some of these hardline Christian Zionist groups. So she's really kind of a mixed bag, and when she's right, she's great. But unfortunately, there are a few other areas where she's pretty off, which frankly,
I'm just saying. I was just saying, as a person that could bring in those people in right-wing areas that want the troops to be home. And that's somebody that served in the military. I think she could be an asset to somebody. But I do agree. Everybody has, some sort of issues
Yeah.
that we don't always agree with. Two more questions. I want to talk about Saudi Arabia. You brought up that they have a big military. I don't understand why everybody in this country thinks Saudi Arabia is such a great country. I mean, they get away with whatever they want. We talked earlier on in the interview with Trump sends them into his hotels. They're buying Trump off by doing that and other things. They killed an American journalist. 16 out of the 19 hijackers were from Saudi Arabia. Nobody brings that up. All the madrasas that they have in their country that preach hate against Israel in the United States, the Wahhabism is insane. That's not real Islam, as far as what I've heard from other people. That's really not the right Islam. What do you think about Saudi Arabia? It seems like all the things that I said is insane.
Yeah, and a big thing in recent years has been their responsibility for the deaths of tens of thousands of Yemenis, either killed outright in airstrikes against civilian neighborhoods and mosques and hospitals and everything else, to the starving people out, the deaths from malnutrition, preventable diseases. I mean, the International Relief Agency says it's the single worst humanitarian crisis in the world. That includes all the terrible things happening in Syria and Central Africa and everywhere else. Even the Democratic Party platform in 2016 called for strengthening our security cooperation with Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf states. Now, the one thing that kind of shifted the debate finally was when they ended up murdering a Washington Post journalist. I mean, it's kind of a shame that one death, got the attention that tens of thousands of Yemeni deaths didn't. But at least it sort of got people to be a little more critical. And you started seeing for the first time majority of Democrats and even a fair number of Republicans saying, "Hey, what in the hell are we doing backing this government?" And Congress voted to cut off arms transfers and strategic cooperations. But then Trump went ahead and declared a state of emergency, national security threat that enabled him to bypass Congress. And then the latest military budget, the Republicans, along with the Democratic establishment, ended up pushing out an amendment that would have again prohibited aid, so we could have stopped it via the spending measure.
Was that Bernie's bill that you're talking about?
Yeah. But it was actually co-sponsored by quite a few people, including Senator Mike Lee, a conservative Republican from Utah, and others. Bernie was a big initiator, but had broad bipartisan support. But that amendment was stripped by the Democratic leadership in both houses, and putting through the Pentagon spending bill, which is also already ridiculously high. I mean, even more than the Pentagon asked for. So this is a must-pass measure where we could have actually had some leverage, and the Democratic establishment, along with the Republicans, ended up abandoning us. But at least we now have a majority of people in both houses of Congress and both parties saying we shouldn't be doing this, even though they didn't stop it. That at least it's a debate now, and for decades under both Republicans and Democrats, it was not a debate. And indeed, there's probably no single issue in domestic or foreign policy where there is a greater gap between the average American and people on Capitol Hill than the question of U.S. providing arms to dictatorships, occupation armies, and human rights abusers. And another reason I think we need to get somebody like Bernie or Warren as the nominee who will talk about these issues, because I think it should have real resonance with the public.
Well, remember in, I think it was 15 or 16, when Obama's last few days in office, I think it was in 16 rather, they had that issue with Saudi Arabia where the vote came up for the 9/11 families wanted to sue Saudi Arabia, and Obama, that was a big problem for him because I think that passed the House and the Senate, and Obama had to deal with that.
Yeah, and I mean, it's amazing the lengths that again, both parties have gone to downplay and cover up for the Saudis. I mean, you can go back to the 70s and 80s where one of the first non-American astronauts to go up on a U.S. space flight was some Saudi prince, to trying to censor. I forget what one of the three major networks that had a TV movie called Death of a Princess, which is about the murder of a dissident woman in Saudi Arabia with connections to the royal family. I mean, the smuggling, getting the Saudis to fly out of the United States during the time when no flights were allowed in a couple of days after 9/11. And you go down the list, they've just gotten away with all sorts of things, and it's really it's a real shame. And it's not just the oil; it's the fact that because they have so much oil wealth, they buy a lot of infrastructure, and technical and other assistance from the United States. Bechtel Corporation, very based here in San Francisco, very close ties to the Republican establishment. Billions and billions and billions of dollars are there. Not to mention, of course, the arms industry. I mean, a ridiculous amount of arms being sent to Saudi Arabia. And one thing about living in San Francisco, when I'm out by the bay, I see the freighters going in and out under the Golden Gate. When the freighters are coming in, they're low to the water. When they're going out, they're high in the water, which says a lot about our trade deficit. Well, the one thing that's one of the few things where that's cutting into the trade deficit is military stuff. That we, United States, is by far the #1 arms supplier in the world, and the vast majority of these arms go to dictatorships like Saudi Arabia. And yet we claim to be our foreign policy is all about freedom, and here we are. We're one of the first countries to have a revolution against monarchy, and we are the world's #1 backer of the remaining absolute monarchies. I mean, how ironic is that?
Right. I agree. And they talk about the new leader of Saudi Arabia, the new prince, is so progressive, and it's a joke.
They say that every new leader. No, seriously, if you go back to the various kings over the years, they say, "Oh, this one's different. He's a reformer. He's a modernizer." Right.
Give me a break. So let's talk. Last question. The doomsday clock is very close to 12. I mean, we see the Iran nuclear deal went down because Trump, which was actually one of the few great things that Obama really did. North Korea, he went over there and met Kim Jong-il. They still have nukes. They still threaten us. Nothing happened with that. Pakistan and India hate each other. That's a big problem. I mean, the Middle East is still, we still have Iraq and Afghanistan and the issues with that. Libya, we talked about that. So the Middle East is in crisis. How do we make sure that there's not a nuclear war, not just in the Middle East, but any of these places could erupt at any one time?
Well, there was a nuclear non-proliferation treaty that was signed in 1968 that was supposed to stop the horizontal proliferation of nuclear weapons with the 5 then existing nuclear states, United States, Soviet Union, Britain, France, and China. And the only 3 that nowadays have not signed that is India, Pakistan, and Israel. And North Korea had signed, but then they withdrew. So it's 4 total. And the U.S. position has been that we went to war with Iraq because we supposedly had a nuclear program that could lead to nuclear weapons, even though they didn't. We pulled out of a nuclear agreement that severely restricted Iran and making it physically impossible for them to develop a nuclear bomb, even though it could do some limited, medical nuclear and nuclear energy things. And we pulled out of that. Now, and again, we're threatening war because Iran quite reasonably said, "Well, if you pull out of the agreement, we're going to pull out of the agreement." But the thing that a lot of people forget is that if you actually read the Non-Proliferation Treaty, you can find it online. It's only 2 pages long. There's provision there that says, in return for these countries, new countries not developing nuclear weapons, the 5 existing nuclear powers will make good faith efforts to completely disarm, which we haven't done.
Right.
And in fact, we've created more and more and more and more nuclear weapons, and Trump is putting in billions of dollars in new nuclear weapons developments, as did Obama. And the thing is that so if you want to look at countries that are violating non-proliferation treaty, the United States is frankly #1. And this idea we can impose a nuclear apartheid, Israel can have nuclear weapons. Our allies, Pakistan and India, have nuclear weapons. The country we don't like even has the possibility. We have a right to bomb them, invade them, put sanctions on them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And every successful arms control agreement in history has been one where there's mutuality. You know, that both sides. And there's just the one really hopeful sign that has happened since the signing of the NPT has been the establishment of nuclear weapons-free zones. We have nuclear weapons-free zones in Latin America, in Africa, in Central Asia, in Southeast Asia, in the Pacific, in Antarctica. I mean, practically everywhere except for Southwest Asia, and then again the existing parts in the northern tier of the world. And but the United States has consistently opposed the establishment of nuclear weapons-free zone because it would impact our allies like Israel, Pakistan, and India. And in addition, and while we were pushing these draconian sanctions and threats of war because of the of Iraq and Iran's violations, supposed violations of UN Security Council resolutions involving their nuclear program, Israel is currently in violation of UN Security Council resolution 482, which calls for putting their nuclear facilities under trusteeship of the International Atomic Energy Agency. And Pakistan and India are currently in violation of UN Security Council Resolution 1172, which calls for the end of their nuclear weapons and nuclear capable missiles. And yet the United States has not only blocked the UN from enforcing these resolutions, we provide all three countries with nuclear capable missiles and jet fighters. So the thing is that we're not interested in non-proliferation. We're just interested in advancing nuclear programs of ourselves and our allies while threatening war against those who we don't consider our allies.
All right. I actually have one more question. Why is Israel so powerful? I mean, it's just a very small country, and what they do to Palestine is a travesty. Those Palestinian people, those poor people, don't have any rights. Now, I know they have had some issues where they've done some stuff to Israel. Okay. But it's really sad about the settlements. Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, it's clear violation of international law, Fourth Geneva Convention. You cannot transfer your civilian population on the territory seized by military force. Its application to the Israeli-occupied territories has been confirmed by no less than 5 UN Security Council resolutions. These are ones that the U.S. didn't veto, as well as a landmark decision by the International Court of Justice. Israel is militarily powerful, of course, because they're a technologically advanced nation and with a very strong military industrial complex and everything like that. So in that sense, they have that power is evident. Not to mention billions of dollars of U.S. taxpayer subsidies we send to the country every year, and blocking the United Nations from enforcing its resolutions. Any other country that would violate any international legal norms as Israel would be under international sanctions at this point. But again, the U.S. has blocked them from doing that. But I would argue the reason the United States does this is not because Israel is politically powerful or the so-called Israel lobby is politically powerful or that, but because the fact is, if you look at how the United States supported Indonesia's occupation of East Timor for 25 years, where they slaughtered 200,000 people, a third of that island state's population, the fact we still support Morocco's occupation of Western Sahara. We blocked UN resolutions on those two issues too. I mean, it's clear the U.S. is willing to support its allies invading, occupying, colonizing, and oppressing weaker neighbors. We don't need an ethnic lobby to force our hand to do it. And I see it as much more a matter of seeing Israel as a surrogate, a strategic asset for the United States. I mean, people can argue that, well, it's actually ending up making a lot of people hate us, so it probably hurts us in the long term. And I personally would agree with that. But at least among the foreign policy establishment, they say, hey, this is a country that controls the skies in the Middle East. They train U.S. forces in counterinsurgency and counterterrorism. They support pro-Western allies insurgencies, including those the U.S. couldn't give aid to directly for political reasons, like the Nicaraguan Contras, Guatemalan junta, South African apartheid, more recently the Colombian paramilitaries and various Kurdish groups. The military-industrial complexes of the two sides are very closely intertwined. There's battlefield testing for American weapons. I mean, there are all these reasons that the U.S. sees Israel as a strategic asset, and though I think there are obviously moral and legal and long-term strategic questions about why that's the case, that unfortunately is really what it's about, and that's why I'm starting to see there are a few cracks in the establishment that even Sanders and Warren, or more than any other candidate, with the partial exception of Jesse Jackson some years ago, are questioning the nature of the relationship, and public opinion shifts, especially among Democratic voters, has shifted dramatically. So finally, for the first time, it's becoming debatable, though unfortunately we're probably a few years away from actually having a change in policy.
Right. Well, Stephen, you are a vast man of knowledge. I appreciate you saying that, and I hope the listeners learned a lot, because you really have a lot to bring to the table, and I'd love to have you on again. Where can people find more information about you and your works?
Well, you can check out my website, www.stephenzunes.org, STEPHENZUNES.org. I also write for such websites as the Progressive Magazine, Truth Out, and others, where people can also find my work.
Quick question. What do you see in California that's coming up on March 3rd? Do you see a lot of enthusiasm for the Sanders and the Warren campaign, or do we see any enthusiasm for Biden? What are you seeing on the ground?
Well, for the first time, the California primary matters. Like for decades now, the California primary is like the first Tuesday in June, usually long after the nominee had been decided. So California is actually going to be in play. Politicians are going to, the candidates are going to come out here not just to raise money, but to actually campaign. And currently, Bernie Sanders is leading in the polls. But we have a bunch of primaries, including Super Tuesday, between now and then. So it's anybody's guess about where things will be once we get out here to California. What's
your prediction?
I think it's I think Sanders will probably get a plurality of the vote, but it's again it's anybody's guess as to where the.
Well, Warren has a lot of support, correct?
Pardon?
Warren
well, it depends. And Warren, I mean, I think Warren has a very dedicated group of followers. She brings in, I think, a lot of progressives like me, who again may be ideologically closer to Bernie, but think she might be a better president. But also some people who are slightly more, centrist, who recognize that for political reasons we need to have a more progressive nominee, someone who would be progressive enough to energize the base, but not perhaps as scary as Bernie in terms of the establishment. So I think I could, she's more in third place right now in California, but I could see her potentially, gaining ground. I think the important thing is that that both she and Bernie can work together. That whoever becomes the nominee, they can make sure it's one of them, and we don't have Buttigieg or Biden or Bloomberg or one of the more centrist candidates, which I think would be really bad news for the chances of defeating Trump.
I agree. Thank you so much, Stephen, for your time. We'll definitely have you on again.